Now let's see how we can implement the internet identity within our project and use the internet identity to authenticate our users. Now we're going to be writing the login code inside our index.jsx. And at the moment, it's pretty simple. All it does is when it gets initialized, it's going to render our app component and it's going to put it at the root. And our app component consists of our header, faucet, balance, and transfer components. So pretty simple bit of React code in here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to use a package from the Internet Computer called the Auth client. And these two npm packages basically allow us to have a ready-made front end that looks identical to what you see when you use any of the Internet Computer applications that are currently available. So thanks to those packages, we don't actually have to code up the front end. But what we do need to do is to actually import them. We're going to need to import the Auth client class from the Auth client module. And once we've got that class, we can then use it to log in our user or to trigger that front-end login. Inside our initializer, we're going to create a new constant, which I'm just going to call Auth client. And this is going to be a new object created using the Auth client class, and it has a method called create. If we call that, we should create a new Auth client object, which then we're going to use to log in our user. Now, the method is asynchronous, so we're going to have to use a wait on it again. We have to call authclient.login. And here we're going to pass in a JavaScript object that describes who the identity provider is. And the identity provider in this case is going to be a URL that points to the identity service on the Internet Computer, which is basically going to provide the front end for our login purposes so that we don't have to create it ourselves. In addition to the identity provider, we're also going to provide a value for the onSuccess callback. This is going to be what should happen once the login was successful, and I'm going to use the fat arrow notation to open up a set of curly braces to describe what should happen, because at the moment all that we want to happen is once they have been successfully authenticated is just to take the user to our main app, so to render the app. So I'm going to move that line into this callback, and once that's done we can go ahead and test it out. So let's reload, and you can see in my case it says pop-up blocked, so make sure that you allow pop-ups from localhost, which is going to allow us to actually see the login page. And once you've allowed it, hit refresh and it should now allow the pop-up, which takes us to this familiar page allowing us to authenticate with our internet identity. Once I click authenticate, it's going to take me to my device, which I can use Touch ID to authenticate on. And because I don't have a recovery mechanism, it's giving me that prompt, but I'm just going to say add recovery later. And once that's done, I'm allowed to proceed, and it shows me which website is asking for the authentication and who I'm actually authenticating with, which is quite important. And once I hit proceed, it will take me back to my initial website that requested the authentication. Now there's still just one more problem. When we hit refresh, you'll notice that every time the init is called, so when our JavaScript front end loads up, it's going to call this login method and it's going to trigger this, and no matter how many times we authenticate ourselves and log in, it's still going to repeat this process. So how can we make sure that we check whether if we're already logged in, and in that case, we actually bypass the login process? Well, underneath here, one of the things that we can check for is we can use an await to wait and check to see if the auth client is authenticated. And this method, of course, comes from the auth client class. And once we've checked that, we can go ahead and just console log and say logged in. Let's check and see if that works. So let's pull up our console, and you can see even without going through the login process, we're currently already logged in. And this is because the login is cached. So just as when you log on to Facebook or Gmail, you don't have to log on repeatedly every single time you try to access it. There's a memory that stores whether if you have already been logged in. And if within 8 days you come back to the website, it should know that you have logged in before and won't force you to go through the process. Now we know that we can check to see if we're already authenticated. That means that we can simply navigate the user to our app element instead of having to go through the login process to do that. In that case, let me go ahead and create just below this init definition an async function, which we'll call handle authenticated. And we're going to pass in the auth client as an input to this function. And inside this function, for now, all that's going to happen is we're going to render the app component. And we're going to do that on the success callback of our login method. So handle authentication, passing in the auth client. But we're also going to do that if we check that we're already logged in and we can bypass the login process. And now we can finally add the else statement to say if they're not authenticated, well, in that case, let's go ahead and force them to log in. Now that's done, let's go ahead and hit save and test it out. So we can close down our Internet Identity tab, and let's go ahead and refresh this page. And because we're already logged in, we're not forced to log in through the Internet Identity again. Now, theoretically, once we've got our account authenticated, then that will be the user on the front end. So it means when you click on Give Me, the faucet should be distributing the DANG tokens to the logged in user's account. But as you can see right now, if I click on this, it's still going to tell me already claimed because this method call is still going through an unauthenticated message.caller. So how do we get our method calls here from our payout or our transfer to tap into the authenticated user instead of an anonymous user? Well, that is what we're going to do in the next lesson. So for all of that and more, I'll see you there.